Let's talk about prehistorics. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. The prehistoric era of Gibson is one of my favorites, and it's mainly because of the name. It just sounds like you're talking about dinosaurs or something before the history of written time. But no, in this case it means before the historic division opens up. So we're talking about the custom art historic division in 1993, better known as the custom shop. So for most regular people, this probably just looks like a regular Les Paul. However, this is the beginning of all of the reissues, the year 1983. Now before we get too heavy into this, please keep in mind there are prehistorics made before that year. We're just not necessarily going to cover them in this particular episode because I've got a different guitar to talk about that with. But there were custom orders from dealers and one-offs like Strings and Things, or like this crazy quilt top 1982 that is technically a prehistoric. So you might be asking me, hey Trogly, what makes a prehistoric a prehistoric? It has to have an ABR1 bridge. This is considered very special on a Les Paul from the 70s or 80s. It must feature an ink stamp serial number in this format, X space XXXX. Because don't get me wrong, the standard 82 is a mighty fine model that Kalamazoo produced in 1982. However, it does not have the ink stamp serial number, despite it still having the official ABR1 bridge. So 1983 is the first year that Gibson catches on to the idea that the other dealers were selling and decides to offer up something called the Les Paul reissue. That's what they called it, but they were trying to recreate a 59 burst. Here's an 83 compared to a 1980 standard. Now you gotta remember 82, 83 is a transitional thing, so you would have had a mahogany neck by then, and the volutes have disappeared. Your prehistorics also went with two-piece flame maple tops way before the regular standards did. But you can see the prehistoric headstock is a little bit different than what they would use on a regular standard. And also take a close look at the logo. You see how this one's a little bit more blocky? Whereas the prehistoric logo looks a little bit weird, but they were trying to recreate the originals. That's another thing that makes a prehistoric special. The only reason I don't have it as a firm rule is because some of the very, very early prehistorics don't have it yet. But after 1983, that's something else that you need to have. The prehistorics also start to get like the better top carve that Gibson discovered around 1980 with the Heritage series. But these are best for somebody who wants an older guitar but can't necessarily afford a real burst at $250,000+. These tend to fall within that $4 to $10K range, depending on the run, the top, condition, things like that. By all means, if you could care less about age or history, go for a modern day reissue. As far as a 59 reissue goes, they are 100% significantly better guitars in that respect. Now put your pitchforks down. When I say better in this episode, I mean closer to 59 spec. There's an argument that could be made for 80s reissues and modern day reissues. They're both excellent guitars. You've just got to choose what works best for you. But the one thing a prehistoric won't have that the 1993 custom shop produced historic 59 reissues do have is the long neck tenon. You have to look underneath the pickup to see that. Gibson did not start doing that until the formal custom shop opens, and here you can kind of see the difference. They changed up the colors in 93, gave you an even better top carve, unique tops. Tom Murphy was working there. You can check out this episode for more. And generally speaking, the 83s and 84s are the most collectible because they're very new. But when Gibson changes ownership for the 1986 year, you can still find prehistorics from that 86 to early 1993. However, they're just not quite as special as the earlier prehistorics because they do not get the Tim Shaw PAFs. They start to change that in the later 80s, and that's why those aren't as valuable as the early ones. Now, how do you read the serials of prehistorics? The main run starts like this in 1983. The 3 stands for what year you are. So 3, 1983, 5, 1985. The 1989s are kind of cool because they start with a 9. However, there is a run right before the 3s that uses the 9, so people accidentally list them as a 1989 reissue all the time. You'll want to verify things like pot codes to see if you have one of those. That was formerly called the Mark Knopfler run. However, since that guitar recently came up for auction, his is actually a prehistoric, where it has the small font, so it's slightly different than that. So the prehistoric era Typically speaking, you're talking 1983 through late 1993. However, the ones that come before that, they're a little bit different. Just know if you have one, they're incredibly special. But just your standard 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then they flip over again for the early 90s. That just tells you the year, and then this is the production number. Another reason why the later 80s prehistorics aren't as expensive, simply because they made more of them then. So this one is number 241, made in 1983. So here's an interesting representation. 1983, 1993, 2019, basically your current day production. All the small nitty-gritty changes. Now, if you're curious what's the difference between these two, it ends up coming down to really small nitpicky details like the Les Paul model silkscreen being a little bit higher, the type of glue used to put things together being hot hide versus just your regular tight bond over here. But don't worry, I've still got more information for you guys today, but let's go ahead and throw this one over onto the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. An hour of cleaning later, here we are. The top has really just come to life. But unfortunately, this is just one of those perpetually dirty guitars. I mean, do you see how much the clear coat has ambered? It feels nice and smooth now. It's not quite as sticky. And that also helps our flame top dance a bit. But let's go ahead and check out our pickups. We are indeed lucky. We have our original 1983 dated Tim Shaw PAF in the neck, and in August of 1983 Tim Shaw in the bridge. But inside our neck pickup cavity, we can see a few different things. So first, is always my favorite to see in here, the Made in USA stamp gets moved to the neck pickup cavity on some of the early 83s. Because that's something else that makes a prehistoric. You don't have a Made in USA stamp on the back of the headstock. But our second is HDSB. Now I believe that stands for Heritage Dark Sunburst. And normally that looks like this. It's kind of like a tobacco sunburst, but on a reissue. It just has like a light honey brown border. But it appears this one either didn't get the brown border to it, or it's just faded out over the years. You can still see like a little bit of it right here, but it just kind of plays peekaboo. I don't see any of the brown around our pickup cavities or underneath our pick guard, so it's possible this was just a pick guard off kind of guitar. But I've seen a few of these 83s have these spectacular tops in this color hue. You can check out this video to see a serial number 1 version. But now inside our bridge pickup cavity, it looks like we can just barely see somebody's name, which was a sign off of the worker. Then you see the 3. These are very traditionally constructed. You don't have an additional pancake layer between the maple top and mahogany body. It's just your regular top and body. Now here's another quirk to these early ones. You'll notice there's actually a gap between the fretboard and the neck pickup. You definitely won't find that on a modern day reissue, but for whatever reason, they did that. As far as our readings, I get 7.13 in the bridge, 7.15 in the neck, and they play together at 357. Those are on the lower end of a Tim Shaw PAF. You can find them ranging from about 7.1-ish to about 7.6. But now, bridge and tailpiece time. You don't see this very often. The black plastic spacer between the bridge and the thumb posts is indeed factory original. Usually it's just during setups, people take them off, they forget about them and lose them. So kind of cool that we have that for our original wire retainer ABR1. They just have the Gibson patent number. They're very similar to what they used in the 70s. But there you can see the post drilled directly into the top. No bushing within the body. But besides not having a long neck tenon, there's another difference between a modern day one. It's a full weight tailpiece instead of lightweight aluminum. It's common for people to take these and modify their plastics and hardware to get as close to a reissue as possible. Because you gotta remember, these weren't always expensive on the used market. It took time to make these things cool again once the custom shop reissues came out. But on this one, somebody swapped it into more historically correct knobs. It would have originally had more of an amber set, like what we saw on some of those other guitars. But these did ship with the thumb bleeders. That's the nickname given to these sharp things that tell you what position your knob is at. And here's a quick look at our pick guard. Nothing too special there. The top carve is just really impressive on this one. I love it. As far as our condition, it's really not too bad. It's got a couple of gouges and dings in the top. But generally speaking, the condition of a prehistoric doesn't really matter as long as it's not like completely thrashed and trashed. There's some unfortunate dings and gouges in this. I would say this is definitely the worst one. It kind of disturbed the finish a bit. And we've got like a ding over here, some minor ones there. But all things considered, A lot of these got played pretty heavily. But now we can move on from our two-piece flame maple top and mahogany body to our mahogany neck and rosewood fretboard. I polished those frets up, conditioned our fretboard, so we should be good for a small tone sample out of this one. But our nice dark rosewood fretboard with our fancy acrylic inlays. But our nut measure is 1.71 inches. That increases to 2.06 at the 12th. 0.85 first fret neck depth, and 0.98 by the 12th. Prehistorics are typically on the skinny side, so they're more like 1960 reissues in that aspect. They're not quite the in-betweener neck that they are of today. Still just a rounded C shape though. Here's a look at that neck profile, 1st fret and 12th fret. Now the face of the headstock. Here's something else that prehistorics just don't get right. They still have the washer screw-on bushings, so they don't get that very cool historic look of the vintage ferrule Clusons. So just something you kind of have to live with if you like the prehistorics, or a reason why you might choose a more modern day one. And unfortunately, these tuners are well known for breaking. Like, this one's got a lot of play to it, but so far it seems like it works. Here's an up-close look at the Gibson prehistoric logo. Is an outline uncommon? No, not at all. It's just another one of their quirks that you have to live with. But our truss rod's looking pretty good on this one. Just has a couple of threads showing, but it moves with little effort both ways. After polishing up the back, I actually found some interesting wood grain figuring. There's like a little bit of bird's eye dancing to it. It's not much and kind of hard to see in this lighting, but it's there. But the back is where some of the differences between a modern day historic will come in. This is just like a regular wine red like finish. It's not the aniline dyed cherry staining. So it looks close enough until you know how they actually did it back in the 50s. But this one just has some minor buckle worming back here and some scratches. All things considered, not too bad. But these did indeed get the thin binding in the cutaway. What you're seeing right there by the binding is actually the maple top covered over in this red finish. And there's some strap or case scuffs along the edge. We've got the correct plastic output jack plate on these. And we'll take a look around the other edge. More of the same. But now our pickup cavities. I could go either way on this. Do you guys think that's the original solder joint? I mean, it just looks a little bit cleaner than I've seen on some of these. However, it still looks believable enough. Like, compare it to over here, I don't think that's ever been touched. But it's not uncommon for people to play around with other pickups in these at one point in time, because Tim Shaw's weren't always these super awesome coveted pickup sets that sell for $1,000. But here's always a good way to date your prehistoric by our pot codes. So 137 tells you the manufacturer, and then the next two tell you the year, and the last two tell you the week. So that looks like the 28th week of 1983, and that matches over here. These ones are not quite readable. And here's a look at the toggle switch, just for fun. Moving up the backside of the neck, a couple of stray dings and minor marks, but nothing too bad. Just a couple of dings around here. There's our serial number, 30241. There is no Made in USA stamp back here. However, there is like the outline of a shop sticker or something. We'll have to see if that shows up under Blacklight. Yeah, that's a perfect test. Super ghostly green. You can see where some sweat absorption has occurred there, but that's kind of to be expected here. Plastics are matching very nicely. Face of the headstock only shows mild trauma, maybe a little bit of lacquer rubbing there. Maybe a clip-on tuner of some sort. I'm surprised we didn't see that shop sticker over here, but it must not have affected the finish. Thankfully, no breaks, cracks, or repairs. Just a couple of finish spots. And our back's looking good too. Not too bad for an 83. Now this will vary example to example. This one's 0.2 ounces under 10 pounds, 9 pounds 15.8. So a far cry from the nice 8.5 pound reissues of today. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how these Tim Shaw PAF sound. Best way to describe this guitar in its current setup is really mellow. Pickups were pretty low. I decided to raise them up a little bit. So there we go, a 1983 prehistoric. I hope this video helped you understand that topic a little bit better. That's maybe 50% of my knowledge on these things, but that's the most important stuff to know because there's so many minute details between them all. For my collection, I would like to have one from every single year because it's easier to see them all lined up and then I can say, oh yeah, this, and this. But 83 is that first special year where there's so many different small runs before they finally figured out what they wanted to mainly do. And this is a perfect example of that first main run that they did with the generalized specs. So they're not as good as a modern day reissue. However, if you're looking for a 70s or an 80s standard, I always say go for one of the prehistorics because they're just so much better than a regular standard of those eras. I've never really been a big fan of a 70s or 80s regular Les Paul standard because these really aren't that much more in comparison and they're just so much better. And that's what makes these special. It's the best made Les Paul standard in the Norlin era. If you're talking 83, 84, 85 before we transition into the Henry J. But that's enough for this topic today. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow on the next one. Take care.